All right, so Glenn, we're just going to have a conversation about critical thinking. Kind of in your experience and having a chance to work with people in a variety of different situations, what are some of the things that you think differentiate a great critical thinker from somebody who might consider average?
Well, I think reading literature, scientific or I guess primarily scientific, in the papers we read at work. One of the things that seems to be correlated with better thinking is clarity of writing. So the ability to clearly articulate a position and draw conclusions, and being simple without being simplistic is clearly key. But the more complex and tangled up writing is, sometimes it can point to less than stellar critical thinking, because if you can't boil it down in a way that's clear in writing, then I found that I probably haven't thought everything out, and have found in my experience at Savvy, those that have helped me write have found all sorts of flaws in thinking when I went to write things down and try to clarify it. So I think writing is key, and being able to write clearly. And that's clearly a skill that can be developed. Yeah. So back to the earlier question, there are some people that can write naturally better than others. But I think that's key. The other thing that, I was trained, my education and sort of jobs prior to Savvy that seemed to resonate with me is those that are the best, some of the best thinkers are those that are the least confident in some ways about how good their thinking is, ironically. So those that are most contingent in their position or struggling to understand, do they have a tenable position, that usually indicates a better awareness of where some of the weaknesses in an argument are.
So let me ask you about that. So let's imagine that you're having a conversation with a researcher, and they come to you and they're very tentative about the statements they make. Where's kind of the dividing line between that, like, intellectual humility, and at what point do you start to think they just don't know what they're talking about, right? Do you kind of get what I'm going at with that?
Yeah, and I think it's correlated. It's definitely not necessarily causal. I mean, you can have very confident people who are confident of their position and they've thought it all through, and they don't present that confidence until they're confident for good reason. And then there's others that will present and sort of rhetorically overstate their confidence because they haven't thought through it. So I think, one, being honest with oneself about understanding is key. How well do I believe I understand something? And if I'm open and honest to those I'm working about where I get confused or where I get frustrated trying to draw conclusions, or do I really believe some baseline premise that I'm trying to draw conclusions from? Sometimes I do that. I'll take as an assumption a baseline premise I have no reason to believe other than I was told, and then I'll draw a conclusion or try to. And so some of the tentative nature of that is because I don't know for sure that these underlying assumptions are true. So I think it's hard to parse sometimes, but I think in terms of working teams, just developing confidence and having an environment to be honest with people you're working with about it.
Yeah. Let me ask some more targeted questions in the context of a project. So imagine that I'm put on a project. I have a chance to work with you. What would be some things that you would be looking for me to do to really demonstrate that I'm thinking hard about this at the outset of a project?
So, in terms of an initiative or something, that I think in terms of some of the things that we do up front, I don't want to say literally question everything, but question everything.
Yeah.
Do enough homework about the topic in general, and I found this over the years. Even if I have a really skinny agenda for a kickoff meeting, or I don't know very much about it, make some effort to figure out as much as one can in whatever time you have, reasonably, to figure out as much as you can about what you think this project's about. And then take that understanding, as rudimentary or simplistic as it may be, and then just spend some time, even if it's only 20 minutes, trying to flesh out implications to that, and spend time with Google. And so take this mental framework of what I believe the project is, and then I'll go spend as little as 10 or 15, 20 minutes, or as much as an evening, trying to learn as much as I can to update this mental model in my mind about what I believe this is. Now, I know at this stage that it's most certainly not what we're about, but I've at least done some homework and research around what seems reasonable given what I know. I don't go in blank slate, tabula rasa, right? I don't go into a kickoff meeting, tell me what to do, what are we doing? I try to bring something to it. I guess that's the point. And then in that meeting, that part of the homework, that can start a conversation where you're trying to test your sense of what you believe it's about. And you need to assume you don't have much of a sense about it, but you've at least got something, or I've at least got something around what I believe it is. And so I've got more information than I otherwise would have going into a meeting. I mean, I've sort of jumbled the pronouns there a bit, but bring something to the table external, and then that leads to a conversation where you sort of test the model about what you thought it was about or what you thought you were doing.
That's great. So one thing that I think you kind of bounced around that related to a question that I've had is that thinking about interrogating a senior scientist or somebody else on the project, you kind of have two extremes. At one extreme, they're simply just not asking enough questions and not knowing the questions to ask. And on the other extreme is just bombarding a person, and where they cringe when they see you walking down the hall because they know they're about to lose a half hour of their life answering questions that maybe Google already knew, right? And that somewhere in the middle of all that is the sweet spot where somebody who's really good at critical thinking lives.
I definitely have been on both sides of that, where I'll show up to a meeting and most of the people in the room, we try to figure out what we're doing, and then I was like, we're going to pay the Jones tax today, because I either came with too little or too much baggage or history associated with a project, and it can get inefficient and ask the wrong question. So I think developing the skill and having enough context to where one is in a project to know what questions are right and wrong to ask is key, and it can be grossly inefficient on both sides, which I think implies the need to have work teams that there can be open communication. So if I'm asking too many questions, as I want to do in some cases, being able to have a meta level conversation about the questions and saying, if I'm working with somebody and I'm asking too many questions, to have them go, can we just put that on hold? Can we put it in the parking lot? And then my next question would be, well, why?
Yeah.
That next question, why, would force the articulation of a reason why these are non-contextual at the time. Too many questions. That adds information which should then inform the critical thinking and the question asked, and go, I understand that this isn't germane in a world of minimally viable stuff. This is off to the side. We're trying to narrow it down to something here, and then I can make assumptions around, okay, that makes sense, and push on.
Yeah.
But it requires the back and forth with other people on a team about where those boundaries are. If the response comes back, well, it just doesn't matter, the better critical thinkers will go, why? It's always that second question, and if the response comes back, well, because I said so, then you're like, okay, and that shuts down the building of this mental framework around what you're doing.
Right.
So rarely, if ever, does the "because I said so" fly around here.